You know the feeling, right? You set a goal, you drum up literally all the motivation in the world, and you tell yourself, okay, this time is going to be different. And then what happens? A few days, maybe a few weeks later, you just crash right into a wall. Hustle culture loves to tell us that we just need to brute force our way to success. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But honestly, when we actually look at the behavioral science, we realize it's absolutely not a personal failing. Your brain just isn't designed to work that way. Take a look at this. It's a quote from a psychiatric nurse practitioner on Reddit, and it is the perfect anti-motivational hook. They wrote, "I'm a psych NP, here's why your willpower keeps failing, and the neuroscience trick that replaces it." I love this because it perfectly captures what we're doing today. We're tossing out those exhausted old cultural myths and replacing them with hard, empirically backed behavioral science. No more white-knuckling our way through life. It's all about systemic, proven design. So, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the fascinating science that completely dismantles the lies we've been sold about achievement. By the time we wrap this up, you're going to understand exactly why you get stuck, and way more importantly, you'll have the actual neuroscientific tools to rewire how you execute your goals. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our mental roadmap for today. First, the willpower myth. Second, how habit loops work. Then, the positive thinking trap, followed by the MCII strategy, pre-commitment and choice, and finally, auditing your habits.
All right, part one, the willpower myth, the illusion of control.
Let's just tackle that universal frustration head-on. The idea that we have total control over our choices if we just try harder. Yeah, it's a total illusion. And humans have literally struggled with this for centuries. The ancient Greeks even had a specific word for it, akrasia. It's that completely baffling phenomenon where you act against your own better judgment. I mean, think about it. Have you ever spent a solid hour meticulously reorganizing your desk just to avoid doing the actual deep work you sat down to do? Or, I don't know, to avoid going to the grocery store? That right there is akrasia. We constantly fall into this intention-action gap because we're relying on our will, which is, frankly, notoriously unreliable.
Moving right along to part two, how habit loops work, the brain's mechanics.
So, to really understand why willpower fails us, we've got to look under the hood at the underlying neuroscience. Dr. Judd Brewer, an expert in addiction and mindfulness, brilliantly illustrates the core architecture of our behavior here. It's a three-step habit loop. And get this, it's an evolutionary mechanism conserved all the way back to sea slugs. No way, right? Here's how it works. Step one, you encounter a trigger, like seeing food. Step two, you engage in a behavior, like eating it. And step three, the result, your brain releases dopamine. That dopamine is essentially a signal screaming, hey, remember what you just did and where you did it? It is context-dependent memory, hardwired for survival. Basically, we set the habit and then we forget the details so our brain can free up space to focus on other things. But here's where it gets incredibly fascinating. Mental behaviors actually count just as much as physical ones. Dr. Brew talks about a case study of a patient who was trapped in these overlapping loops. He weighed 400 pounds, was addicted to fast food, and struggled with severe generalized anxiety. So he'd feel the physical trigger of anxiety, right? Which then drove the mental behavior of worrying. Because worrying gave him this false sense of control. And then, to numb that underlying anxiety, he would eat fast food. The result? Sure, a temporary distraction, but obvious long-term harm. You simply cannot willpower your way out of a loop like that. You actually have to hack the loop itself. Okay, let's see how this builds into part three, the positive thinking trap, why fantasies fail. Because, if willpower doesn't work, surely just thinking positively will save the day, right? Actually, scratch that. Wrong. Believe it or not, simply imagining a positive future absolutely decreases your goal-relevant efforts. It essentially tricks your brain into feeling like you've already achieved the goal, which totally drains your energy. What behavioral science shows we actually need is something called mental contrasting. This is where you visualize that positive future, but then, and this is absolutely crucial, you deliberately think about the real-world obstacles standing in your way. By linking the fantasy to harsh reality, you activate your expectations of success and literally gear your brain up to do the hard work. Which brings us to part four, the MCII strategy, systemic design. Now that we've covered what doesn't work, let's look at a systemic design that actually does. And it starts with this number right here, 15,907. Let me be clear, this isn't just some self-help theory. This is rigorous empirical science. That number represents the total participants evaluated in a massive Frontiers meta-analysis spanning 24 independent studies. As you can see, this robust data was carefully filtered down through an extensive literature review.
The researchers were evaluating a strategy called mental contrasting with implementation intentions, or MCII for short. They basically wanted to know, if you combine mental contrasting with concrete planning, does it actually move the needle? And spoiler alert, the data proves that it is a remarkably effective, low-cost strategy for real-world goal achievement.
And what's really amazing is just how adaptable this tool is. The meta-analysis demonstrated that MCI has a proven small to medium effect size. Now, in science speak, that means it creates reliable, measurable change across all these different facets of our lives. Whether people were trying to hit the gym more, pass high-stakes exams, regulate relationship insecurities, or just manage their time better, this systemic approach yielded incredibly consistent positive results. It really is a universal toolkit.
So, how do you actually do it? Well, it's often referred to as the WHOOP framework. That stands for Wish, Outcome, Obstacle, Plan. You define your wish, you imagine the best possible outcome, you identify your internal obstacle, and then, this is the magic part. You create an implementation intention. This is an if-then plan. Like, if obstacle Y arises, then I will perform behavior Z. Doing this literally strengthens the non-conscious, automatic link in your brain between a specific anticipated situation and a goal-relevant behavior. So in the heat of the moment, you don't need willpower. The decision has already been preloaded. Now, the meta-analysis did reveal one important little nuance about how we actually learn this stuff. Direct interaction, like face-to-face experimenter interventions, does yield stronger results. And that makes sense, right? It kind of forces higher quality planning and commitment. But hey, don't let that discourage you. Cost-saving document interventions, like just doing this online or at home with a piece of paper, still provide a highly feasible and super effective alternative. Moving to part 5, pre-commitment and choice, designing your environment. To really protect ourselves from our own wandering minds, we can look all the way back to the classic story of Odysseus. He knew for a fact that he'd be entirely powerless against the irresistible song of the sirens. So did he rely on his willpower? Nope. He used pre-commitment. He had his crew tie him to the mast of the ship and literally plug their own ears. He actively restricted his future options to totally prevent self-sabotage.
Bringing that into our modern lives, pre-commitment looks like auto-transferring your retirement funds so you literally never even see the cash. Or, leaving the cookies at the grocery store so you don't have to fight the urge to eat them at 10 p.m. And behavioral science actually shows these strategies work so much better when they're imposed by others rather than ourselves. So seriously, have a friend set your phone's screen time password. You are literally engineering a physical barrier against your future weaker self.
Now, what's really interesting about this next concept is how it completely destroys another cultural myth, the idea that having more choices makes us happier and more successful. In reality, when we have too many options, we just face choice overload. Maximizers are those people who feel they must explore every single option to find the absolute perfect one. Research shows they consistently end up miserable and full of regret. On the flip side, satisficers define a threshold of good enough. They pick the very first option that meets it, and they are significantly happier. So to protect your willpower, you really must limit your options. Give yourself permission to just accept good enough. And finally, part 6, auditing your habits, from theory to action. We've covered a ton of ground today, from neuroscience to meta-analyses. But to really bring this explainer home, we have to recognize exactly when a behavior shifts from being a basic biological necessity to a genuinely harmful addiction. Dr. Brewer uses this brilliant eating analogy. He says there's a pleasure plateau, where your body is like, hey, I need these calories, this is great. But then, just past that is the overindulgence cliff, where you just keep eating despite your body practically begging you to stop. That's when the habit has crossed the line. You have to map out your own loops. What's the trigger? What's the behavior? And what is the actual tangible result? So I want to leave you with this provocative question straight from Dr. Brewer's clinical practice. What am I getting from this? Seriously, use this question today. When you feel that sudden urge to mindlessly scroll your phone or eat when you aren't even hungry or worry endlessly about something in the future, just pause. Ask yourself, what am I actually getting from this? Uncovering the true results of your behaviors is the absolute first step to breaking the loop and designing a system that basically guarantees your success. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I challenge you to go build your very first WHOOP plan today.